I lived in their basement for 15 years so they could have the beautiful house upstairs. I gave them my life savings for the down payment, paid the bills they couldn't afford, and raised their children while they built their perfect lives. They thanked me by putting a for sale sign on the lawn and telling me to find a place. They locked me out during the open house and threw my life's treasures into trash bags. They didn't know that the quiet old woman in the basement was a retired accountant. They didn't know I kept every single receipt. They were about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between a guest and an investor. Before I begin, thank you for being here. For being part of this community. If you believe in the power of a woman finding her voice and reclaiming her dignity, then you are in the right place. Please, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. It truly means the world to me. Now let me tell you what they did to me. My name is Abeni Adebayo, and for 75 years, my life has been a ledger, a careful accounting of debits and credits. I was born in Lagos, Nigeria, in a home filled with the scent of jollof rice and the boisterous laughter of a large family. I was trained as an accountant, a profession that suited my orderly, meticulous mind. I saw the world in columns and balances, in assets and liabilities. The greatest asset of my life, the one entry for which I would debit my own accounts to zero, was my son Michael. I came to America with him when he was just a boy, leaving behind the familiar warmth of Lagos for the sprawling, bewildering promise of Atlanta, Georgia. I worked tirelessly, my accounting skills finding me a respectable job in a downtown firm. Every penny I earned, every sacrifice I made, was to build a foundation for him, a life of American stability and opportunity that I had never known. I was a widow and he was my world, the sole beneficiary of my life's ambition. 15 years ago, Michael and his new wife, Kimberly, came to me with a proposition. They were expecting their first child, Jada, and were living in a small, cramped apartment. They had found their dream home, a large two-story colonial in the manicured suburbs of Alpharetta, a house with a big yard where their children could play, in a school district that promised a bright future. It was the perfect American dream. The only problem was the down payment. It was a figure far beyond their reach. I, however, had been preparing for this moment my entire life. I had my retirement savings, a substantial nest egg accumulated over 30 years of diligent work and frugal living. It was my security, my safety net for my old age. But seeing the hope in my son's eyes, the dream of a family home for my unborn grandchild, I did not hesitate. I will provide the down payment, I told them, my heart swelling with the joy of being able to give them this gift. My savings will be my contribution. We will all live together. A multi-generational home. It is the Nigerian way. I will help with the children, I will cook, I will have my family around me in my old age. They were overjoyed. Michael hugged me, his gratitude palpable. Kimberly, a real estate agent with a smile as bright and hard as polished marble, was even more effusive. The day we went to the lawyer's office to finalize the purchase was the day the foundation of the lie was laid. We sat in a stuffy wood-paneled office. I had the cashier's check from my liquidated retirement account in my purse, a check that represented my entire life's work. When the lawyer began discussing how the deed would be titled, Kimberly placed a perfectly manicured hand on my arm. "Mom," she said, using the affectionate term that always made my heart soften. We were talking and my real estate lawyer said that for tax purposes and liability, it's just so much cleaner if the deed is only in mine and Michael's names. It complicates things with estate planning and capital gains down the line if there are multiple names on the title. It's just a formality, of course. I looked at Michael. He nodded in agreement, his eyes avoiding mine. "She's right, Mama. It's just better for the paperwork. Simpler." A small, quiet alarm bell went off in the back of my accountant's mind. But I silenced it. This was my son. This was my family. I was not a business partner. I was a mother. I was building a home, not an investment portfolio. Kimberly saw the hesitation in my eyes and gave my arm a reassuring squeeze. "Don't you worry about a thing," she said, her smile radiant. "This is your home forever. We'll never, ever sell." I believed her. I handed over the check. And I signed the document that stated I was a gifter, not an investor. I, the accountant, had just made the worst deal of my life. The house was beautiful. And as promised, I moved in with them. But not into one of the spacious upstairs bedrooms. They had finished the basement for me. It was a large, comfortable space with its own small bathroom and a kitchenette. "It will give you your own privacy, Mom," Kimberly had said. "Your own separate space." I accepted this, telling myself it was a modern American way. For the next 15 years, I became the silent, invisible engine of that household. I lived in the basement, but my presence filled every corner of the house. I was the one who woke early to make breakfast before the children, Jada and later Leo, went to school. I was the one who cooked dinner every evening, filling the house with the familiar, comforting aromas of Nigerian stews and rice dishes, a taste of a heritage my grandchildren would otherwise never know. I was the one who cleaned, who did the laundry, who watched the children when they came home from school so Kimberly could focus on her burgeoning real estate career. My contribution was not just domestic, it was financial. I knew they were house poor, their salaries stretched thin by the massive mortgage. So I helped. Every week, I bought the family's groceries, my pension check covering the cost of feeding a family of 4. And every winter, when the heating bills soared, I quietly paid them myself, transferring the money directly to the utility company. I never said a word. It was my contribution, my duty, my love. And through it all I kept my records. The accountant in me could not be silenced. In a set of neat, orderly ledgers in my basement room, I recorded every major expense. I kept every grocery receipt, every canceled check for the heating bills. And in a fireproof box, I kept the original bank statement showing the wire transfer for the down payment. A 6-figure sum that had left my own bank account at zero. I didn't know why I was keeping them. Perhaps it was just habit. Or perhaps, somewhere in the deep, quiet part of my soul, the accountant knew that one day, there would be a final reckoning. For 15 years, our lives settled into a rhythm that I, in my determined optimism, mistook for harmony. I was the quiet, foundational bass note in the melody of their family life, unseen but essential. I watched my grandchildren Jada and Leo grow from chubby-cheeked toddlers into lanky, thoughtful teenagers. I measured their height in pencil marks on a doorframe in my basement room. I was their constant, their confidant, the keeper of their small secrets. Michael and Kimberly were busy, always busy, building their careers, managing their social lives. I was the stable center that allowed their world to spin. I told myself we were a family, a modern, multi-generational family, and that my place in the basement was a position of honor, the bedrock upon which their lives were built. The first crack in that foundation appeared on a Tuesday morning in April. I was returning from my daily walk around the neighborhood, a ritual that kept my old bones moving and my mind clear. As I turned the corner onto our street, I saw it. A stark, professionally printed sign had been hammered into the center of our pristine lawn. It was a real estate sign with a smiling, glamorous picture of Kimberly on it. And in bold, declarative letters it read, "For sale." The world seemed to tilt for a moment. I stood on the sidewalk, my heart pounding a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. I must have misunderstood. This had to be a mistake. Perhaps it was a sign for a neighbor's house, wrongly placed. But no, it was our address, our lawn. I walked into the house, the front door unlocked as always, and found Michael in the kitchen, pouring himself a cup of coffee, his back to me. "Michael," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "There's a sign. On the lawn." He sighed, a deep, weary sound before he even turned to face me. "Oh, that," he said, his tone dismissive. "Don't worry about it, Mama. Kimberly is just testing the market. The housing market is crazy right now. We're just seeing what the house might be worth. It doesn't mean anything." "It means you are selling our home," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "No, no," he said quickly, finally turning to look at me, his eyes unable to meet mine. "It's just an appraisal, really. A way to understand our assets. We're not going anywhere. This is your home." I wanted to believe him. Desperately. I clung to his words, his weak reassurances, like a drowning woman clings to a piece of driftwood. But the accountant in me, the part that deals in facts and figures, not hopes and dreams, knew that a for sale sign is not an appraisal. It is a declaration of intent. The true, devastating earthquake came a week later. It was a Saturday. Michael and Kimberly had told me they were taking the children out for the day, a special family outing. "You should rest, Mama," Michael had said. "We'll be back this evening." I felt a pang of disappointment at being excluded, but I accepted it. I decided to take a longer walk than usual, heading to the small park at the edge of the subdivision. I sat on a bench watching the young families play, and I felt a profound sense of loneliness. When I returned to the house an hour later, something was wrong. The driveway was filled with unfamiliar, expensive cars. I walked up the front path, my keys in my hand, and tried to open the door. It was locked. The deadbolt was thrown. I peered through the sidelight window, and my blood ran cold. The house was filled with strangers. Well-dressed couples were wandering through the living room, peering into the dining room, their faces critical, appraising. And leading them, her voice a smooth, professional purr, was Kimberly. She was giving a tour. It was an open house. An open house they had deliberately sent me away for and then locked me out of. I stood there on my own front porch, a ghost at my own wake. I was invisible. I saw one of the couples point to the beautiful Nigerian masks I had hung in the hallway, a gift from my brother in Lagos. I saw Kimberly say something and the couple laughed. Were they laughing at my art? At my history? My mind was reeling, a maelstrom of shock and humiliation. I knocked on the door. Softly at first, then louder. No one came. They couldn't hear me over the murmur of conversation inside. I went to the living room window and tapped on the glass. Kimberly looked up. Our eyes met. I saw a flash of pure, cold panic in her expression. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head, then turned back to her clients, her professional smile plastered back on her face. She was pretending she didn't see me. She was pretending I wasn't there. Desperate, I went to the mail slot in the front door and pushed it open. Leo. I called out, my voice cracking. Jada. It's Grandma. A moment later, my grandson Leo's small face appeared in the opening. His eyes were wide with fear and shame. Grandma, you can't be here, he whispered, his voice trembling. Leo, please just open the door, I pleaded. I can't, he whispered, tears welling in his eyes. Daddy said not to let you talk to anyone. He said it might confuse the buyers. Confuse the buyers. The words were a physical blow. I was not a resident, not a family member. I was a complication. A confusing variable that needed to be hidden from view so that the transaction could proceed smoothly. They had not just excluded me from their home. They had demoted me to a liability. I backed away from the door, my legs unsteady. I stumbled down the porch steps and stood on the sidewalk, watching as strangers appraised the life I had built, the home I had paid for. I was an exile, locked out of my own life, my only communication a whispered, shameful message from my grandson through a mail slot. The crack in the foundation was now a gaping, unbridgeable chasm, and I was standing on the wrong side of it. The open house was not an isolated incident. It was the beginning of a campaign of escalating cruelty, a series of small, deliberate humiliations designed to make me feel so unwelcome, so powerless, that I would simply disappear. When I finally confronted Michael about it that evening, my voice shaking with a hurt so profound I could barely speak, he resorted to the coward's most effective weapon, gaslighting. Mama, you're overreacting, he said, his eyes fixed on the television screen. It wasn't an open house. Kimberly was just showing the property to a few colleagues. A professional courtesy. We locked the door for security. You know how it is. You sent me away, I said, my voice a low whisper. You locked me out of my own home. It's not your home on paper, Mom, he said, the words slipping out before he could stop them, a flash of the cold, hard truth beneath the flimsy lies. He quickly backtracked. I just mean we have to be careful. You can't be too safe these days. He refused to discuss it further, turning the volume on the television up, effectively ending the conversation. The next day I went down to my basement sanctuary to find it had been violated. The small, orderly space that had been my refuge for 15 years was in chaos. In the corner where my small wardrobe and dresser used to be, there was now a pile of black industrial-sized trash bags. My heart seized. I walked over and tore one open. Inside, my clothes were stuffed, wrinkled, and crammed together without care. I opened another. My photo albums, the ones filled with pictures of my late husband, of Michael as a boy, of my parents in Lagos. They were just thrown in, their corners bent, their covers scuffed. I frantically opened the third bag, and the air left my lungs. On top of a pile of my shoes lay my Bible, the one my mother had given me when I left for America, its worn leather cover soft as silk. It was just tossed in, its pages bent, treated like any other piece of household clutter. It was a desecration. Kimberly appeared at the top of the basement stairs, a cup of coffee in her hand, her expression one of bland indifference. Oh, good, you found them, she said. I had a stager come by this morning and she said we needed to depersonalize the space. You know, make it look bigger, more neutral. So I just packed up some of your things to get them out of the way. You put my Bible in a trash bag, I said, my voice hollow with disbelief. She shrugged, taking a sip of her coffee. It's just stuff, Ebony, she said, using my first name, a subtle but significant shift. I was no longer Mom. I was Ebony. A tenant. A problem. You'll have your own place soon. You can unpack it all then. The final financial insult, the one that severed the last fraying thread of my love and patience, was delivered a week later. They sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where I had served them thousands of meals. They had spreadsheets printed out. It was a mockery of the accounting work I had done my entire life. Mom, Michael began, his face a mask of pained sincerity. We've been running the numbers, and with the house on the market we have to be really careful with our expenses. The utility bills are just astronomical. Kimberly chimed in, her voice dripping with false sympathy. We know you're on a fixed income, but we were thinking just for the last month or two until the house sells, it would only be fair if you contributed a little something for rent. To help cover your share of the utilities you're using. I stared at them. I, who had paid for every drop of heating oil that had warmed this house for 15 winters. I, who had paid for the electricity that powered their televisions and their computers. I, who had bought the very food on their table every single week. They were asking me for rent. You've been staying here for free for years after all, Kimberly added, her voice as sharp and as cutting as a shard of glass. That was it. That was the moment the heartbroken mother died and the accountant was resurrected. The grief that had been choking me for weeks did not disappear, but it transmuted. It cooled, it hardened, it sharpened into a point of pure, cold, analytical rage. They had reduced our relationship to a transaction. They had presented me with a bill for my own love. Very well. I would conduct a full audit of this family's finances. And I would present them with a bill of my own. I said nothing. I simply nodded, a gesture of meek, defeated acceptance. They mistook my silence for surrender. They had no idea it was the quiet, focused silence of an accountant who has just found a catastrophic error in the ledger and is about to spend all night finding the evidence to prove it. I went down to my basement, past the black bags filled with my life, and I went to the locked, fireproof box in the back of my closet. I opened it and I took out my own ledgers. The real ones. The ones that told the true story of who had paid for this house. The audit was about to begin. In the weeks that followed, I became a ghost in my own home, a silent, watchful presence they had already written off. My apparent defeat was the perfect camouflage. They saw a quiet old woman shuffling around the basement, resigned to her fate. They had no idea that in that basement a war room was being established. The accountant in me, the part of my brain that had been dormant for so long, was now fully, thrillingly awake. My days took on a new secret rhythm. While the family was out, I would sit at the small desk in my room, my old ledgers spread out before me. They were my weapons. For 15 years I had recorded everything. Not out of suspicion but out of habit, the ingrained discipline of a woman who believes in the power of a balanced sheet. Now these habits became my salvation. I had the canceled checks for every heating oil delivery since they had moved in. I had the grocery receipts, thousands of them, a paper trail that documented every gallon of milk, every loaf of bread, every bag of rice I had purchased for their family. And I had the most important document of all, the original bank statement showing the wire transfer of my entire life savings to the escrow company for the down payment on this house. I spent hours with my calculator, my mind sharp and clear. I calculated the total amount of the down payment. I calculated the total of all the utility bills and grocery expenses I had covered. Then I went to the library and researched the appreciation of real estate in our specific Alpharetta zip code over the past 15 years. I cross-referenced it with the initial purchase price and the current listing price of the house. The numbers told a story far more powerful than any emotional appeal. My down payment, combined with my documented contributions to the household maintenance, accounted for a staggering 80% of the home's current market value. I had not been a guest. I had not been a tenant. I had been the primary investor, the silent majority shareholder in this family enterprise. They had been living in my house, not the other way around. Armed with this mountain of evidence, I made the most important call of my life. I did not call a family counselor. I called a lawyer. I found him through a Nigerian community network in Atlanta, a man named Tunde Okoro, a formidable attorney known for his fierce advocacy in cases of elder law and financial exploitation. I met him not in his fancy downtown office, but at a quiet coffee shop in a different part of town. I arrived with a single heavy briefcase. When he sat down, I did not begin with the story of my heartbreak of the trash bags of the open house. I began by opening the briefcase. I laid out the documents on the table one by one. The wire transfer statement, the ledgers, the stacks of canceled checks neatly bundled by year, the grocery receipts organized in chronological order. I presented him with my final spreadsheet, a single page that summarized 15 years of my financial life in this house, culminating in a final, undeniable number. He looked at the documents, his eyes sharp and intelligent, scanning each page. He picked up a bundle of checks, his expression unreadable. He spent 20 minutes in complete silence, absorbing the story the numbers told. I waited, my hands folded calmly in my lap. When he finally looked up at me, there was no pity in his eyes. There was something far better, respect, and a cold, controlled anger. "Mrs. Adebayo," he said, his voice a low, powerful baritone, "this is not a family dispute. This is a clear, textbook case of financial exploitation with meticulously documented evidence. They didn't just take advantage of your love. They took advantage of your money. And they made the fatal mistake of doing it to a brilliant accountant. What can we do?" I asked, my voice quiet. "We do not ask for your money back," he said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. "We do not sue for a percentage. We fight for the whole thing. We will argue for the imposition of a constructive trust. We will argue that because your funds were used to acquire the property under false pretenses, they have been holding the house in trust for you all along. We will fight for the title. We will fight for the house itself." The audacity of it took my breath away. It was a strategy so bold, so absolute, it had never occurred to me. "First," he said, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "we let them proceed. Let them accept an offer on the house. Let them get to the closing table. The closer they get to the money, the more devastating the blow will be when we stop them." He laid out the plan. He would prepare the lawsuit and the petition for an emergency injunction to freeze the sale. We would wait until they had a signed contract from a buyer. Then, just days before they were set to receive their massive payday, we would strike. I left that coffee shop feeling a sense of power I hadn't felt in years. The quiet, invisible woman who lived in the basement was gone. In her place was the plaintiff, Ebony Adebayo, armed with a briefcase full of evidence and a lawyer who was ready for war. They had pushed me out of my home. I was about to prove I had owned it all along. The weeks that followed were a strange, surreal performance. I played the part of the defeated woman flawlessly. I packed my belongings, the ones that hadn't been relegated to trash bags, into cardboard boxes I found at the grocery store. I spoke to my son and daughter-in-law in quiet, monosyllabic sentences, my eyes downcast. I allowed them to believe they had won, that their campaign of quiet cruelty had succeeded. Their mood in turn became buoyant, almost giddy. They accepted a lucrative offer on the house from a young family, an offer that was well above their asking price. The closing date was set. Their payday was imminent. They were electric with the thrill of their impending windfall, chattering endlessly about the new, even larger house they planned to buy, the new cars, the European vacation. They spoke of these plans in front of me, completely oblivious, their words like salt in a wound I was no longer allowing myself to feel. The day the process server arrived was a masterpiece of timing. Michael and Kimberly were in the backyard, hosting a small celebratory barbecue for a few of their friends. They were laughing, drinking expensive wine, toasting to their own success. The server, a tall, impassive man, walked right past the party and knocked on the front door. I answered it. He handed me the thick envelope. "Ebony Adebayo?" he asked. I nodded. He handed me a second, identical envelope. "For Michael and Kimberly Adebayo. Pick them both." I walked through the house and out the back door into the middle of their party. The laughter died as I approached. I handed the envelope to Michael. "This is for you," I said, my voice clear and steady. He took it, a look of confusion on his face. He tore it open. I watched as his eyes scanned the legal document, his face draining of all color. I saw his hand begin to tremble. "What is this?" Kimberly asked, snatching the papers from his hand. I watched her read. I saw the moment her triumphant smile collapsed into a mask of pure, horrified disbelief. "An emergency injunction?" she shrieked, her voice shrill, attracting the attention of all their guests. "To freeze the sale? On what grounds?" I didn't need to answer. I simply turned and walked back into the house, leaving them standing there, exposed and humiliated in front of their friends, the legal document a testament to their own greed. The trap had been sprung. That night was the night of their planned goodbye dinner. They had booked a large table at a fancy, overpriced restaurant to celebrate the sale of the house with their closest friends. After the events of the afternoon, I had assumed they would cancel. But their pride, their need to maintain appearances, was stronger than their sense of dread. They went ahead with it, and they insisted I come. It was, I realized, to be my final public humiliation, a last chance for them to portray me as the dependent elderly mother they were so graciously helping to find a new place. I accepted. I dressed in a simple but elegant Nigerian lace dress, a garment of quiet dignity. When we arrived at the restaurant, the scene was exactly as I had expected. I was seated at the far end of the long, boisterous table, next to the high chair of a stranger's toddler. I was an afterthought, a piece of inconvenient luggage they had been forced to bring along. Throughout the dinner I was ignored. They laughed, they told stories, they drank champagne. Michael and Kimberly, despite the legal papers now sitting on their kitchen counter, put on a brave, triumphant performance. They spoke of their new chapter, their next adventure. They never once mentioned me. They never once looked my way. Finally, Michael stood up, his glass raised, to make a toast. "To new beginnings," he declared, his voice a little too loud. "To bigger and better things." Everyone cheered. As they drank, Kimberly leaned across the table and spoke to the woman next to her, her voice carrying just enough for me to hear. "We just thought it was time to downsize," she said with a condescending little laugh. "And maybe it's time for some other people to do the same." Her eyes flickered towards me for a fraction of a second. I sat there, a small, quiet woman at the end of a long table, and I felt a profound, unshakable calm. They thought this was my final humiliation. They had no idea it was their last supper. They were toasting to a future that, thanks to the documents now sitting in the county courthouse, no longer existed. They were celebrating a victory that had already been snatched from their grasp. I ate my dinner, I sipped my water, and I watched them, my silence filled with the knowledge of the reckoning that was to come. The courtroom was a cold, impersonal space, all polished wood and somber flags. It was a world away from the warm, vibrant life I had known, but in that moment, it felt like my true home. The accountant in me, the part that believed in order and evidence, felt a sense of rightness being there. Michael and Kimberly sat at the opposing table with their expensive lawyer, looking tense and aggrieved. They were portraying themselves as the victims, dutiful children being harassed by a confused, vindictive mother. Their lawyer argued first. He painted a picture of me as a beloved guest, a grandmother who had been welcomed into their home out of love and generosity. He claimed my financial contributions were informal family gifts, not investments. He argued that my name was not on the deed, and that was the end of the story. It was a competent, professional performance, built on a foundation of lies. Then it was Mr. Okoro's turn. He did not begin with an emotional appeal. He began as I had, with the evidence. He set up a large display board for the judge to see. His presentation was a masterclass in methodical destruction. He started with the wire transfer receipt for the down payment. "Your Honor," he began, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that filled the courtroom. "This document shows that my client, Mrs. Abeni Adebayo, provided 100% of the down payment for the property in question. A sum that, with market appreciation, now represents a conservative estimate of 80% of the home's total equity." He then moved to the stacks of cancelled checks and utility bills. "For 15 years, he continued, my client paid the entirety of the winter heating costs for this large 6-bedroom home. Not as a gift, but as a contribution to the maintenance of an asset she believed she co-owned." He presented the grocery receipts, thousands of them, a mountain of paper that documented 15 years of nourishment I had provided. The argument that Mrs. Adebayo was a guest who was draining utilities is not just false, Your Honor. It is a grotesque inversion of the truth. The evidence shows that it was my client who was subsidizing her children's lifestyle, not the other way around. The final pieces of evidence were the photographs of my belongings stuffed into trash bags, and the sworn affidavit from my grandson, Leo, recounting how he had been told not to let me in the house during the open house. Mr. Okoro concluded with a powerful, quiet fury. "This is not a simple property dispute, Your Honor," he said. "This is a case of calculated, long-term financial and emotional elder exploitation. My client was not a guest in that house. She was its primary investor, its caretaker, and its heart. Her children convinced her to keep her name off the deed through deception, and then when they thought she was old and weak, they tried to discard her and steal her life's work. We are asking the court to see past the names on the deed and to recognize the true ownership of this property by imposing a constructive trust and granting full title to my client, Mrs. Abeni Adebayo." The judge, a stern, intelligent woman with eyes that missed nothing, looked from the mountain of evidence to Michael and Kimberly, whose faces had grown pale and slack. The verdict, when it came, was swift and decisive. "The court finds the evidence presented by the plaintiff to be overwhelming and compelling," she declared, her voice ringing with authority. "A clear and undeniable case of unjust enrichment and financial exploitation has been established. Therefore, this court imposes a constructive trust on the property. Full and unencumbered title is hereby granted to the plaintiff, Abeni Adebayo." A gasp went through the courtroom. Michael looked as if he had been physically struck. Kimberly simply stared, her mouth agape. It was over. They had lost. The next day I returned to the house. My house. Mr. Okoro was with me. I walked up the familiar path, my head held high. I used my own key to open the front door. Michael and Kimberly were in the living room, surrounded by half-packed boxes, their expressions a mixture of shock and sullen fury. Mr. Okoro handed them the official court order. "You have 30 days to vacate the premises," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Michael looked at me, his eyes pleading for the first time in years. "Mama, you can't do this to us. We're your family. Where will we go?" I looked at my son, the boy I had crossed an ocean for, the man who had locked me out of my own home. And I felt a profound, aching sadness but no pity. I had my final line ready. "You wanted me gone," I said, my voice quiet, but as unyielding as the Nigerian earth I came from. "Now I'm the only one allowed to stay." The epilogue of my American story was written in the months that followed. I did not move back into the house. It held too many ghosts. I hired a professional to sell it, and this time the transaction was swift and clean. With the proceeds, my financial future was secure, my life's work restored to me. My final act was not one of revenge, but of return. I stood at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, a place I had passed through so many times, but this time was different. I held a one-way first-class ticket to Lagos, Nigeria. In my purse was my Nigerian passport and my American one. I was a citizen of two worlds, but my heart was finally going home to one. I was not running from anything. I was running toward something. Toward the scent of the sea in Cape Coast, toward the sound of my sister's laughter, toward a place where a mother is not a burden but a treasure. I had come to America to build a foundation for my son. I had succeeded. And now I was finally going home to build a life for myself. The ledger was balanced. The books were closed. And I was free.